All right, let's get into it. Today, we're going to talk about someone you've probably never heard of, but who might just be one of the most profound spiritual teachers America has ever produced. His name is Richard Rose. Some people have called him the greatest man no one's ever heard of. And you know what? By the end of this, I think you'll see why. So, right off the bat, this quote tells you everything you need to know about Richard Rose's style. This wasn't your typical feel-good guru. While everyone else in the 60s and 70s was talking about peace and love, Rose had this incredibly gritty, no-nonsense view of the world. His path wasn't for the faint of heart. It was for people who were absolutely fed up and demanded a real, final answer, no matter how tough that truth might be. So where did this all come from? Well, for Richard Rose, this quest wasn't some kind of midlife crisis or a casual hobby. Nope. From the very beginning, this guy was a man on a mission. And I mean, this wasn't just some intellectual curiosity. This was the one and only thing that mattered to him. It was the driving force of his entire life. He basically decided that he would rather go insane or even die than live one more day in ignorance about who he was and what this whole life thing was about. He wanted the answer, and he was ready to put everything on the line to find it. In this conviction, it started crazy early. One of his first memories was being a little kid and just writing this phrase over and over and over again. It's kind of wild, right? It's like he had this deep sense of destiny from day one, like he knew he was called to do something huge. So that early mission turned into decades of this absolutely relentless search. And Rose didn't just pick one lane and stick to it. He turned his entire life into an experiment, a laboratory, really, where every single possible answer was put to the test. And more often than not, thrown right out. Just look at this timeline. It gives you a sense of his try-everything approach. At just 12 years old, he goes into a seminary looking for a real personal experience of God. But they just offered him books and beliefs, so he left. Then he thought, okay, maybe science has the answer. He dove into physics hoping to find consciousness in atoms, but realized that was just another dead end. Science could tell him how the world worked, but not why. So then he hit the road, traveling all over, meeting every kind of spiritual teacher you can imagine. And he walked away from almost all of them, convinced they were either fooling themselves or fooling others. It was just this ruthless process of elimination. This quote right here really gets to the heart of his method in his 20s. He got incredibly disciplined. We're talking strict vegetarianism, celibacy, long periods of total solitude. His thinking was, if you want to find a pure, unbiased answer about reality, then the tool you're using to perceive it, your own body and mind, has to be as clean and pure as possible. Any kind of indulgence, he thought, just clouds up the lens. So after all those years of intense searching, of trying and failing, something had to break. And boy, did it ever. This brings us to the absolute peak of his personal journey. He was in Seattle. He was 30 years old, and after a lifetime of pushing, searching, and dealing with some serious trauma, the dam finally broke. He had what he later called an accidental success. It was this massive, life-shattering event that gave him the final answer he'd been looking for his whole life, and it became the foundation for everything he would ever teach. Years after it happened, Rose came across a term from Hindu philosophy that perfectly described his experience: Sahaja Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Now that sounds super complex, I know, but the metaphor makes it really simple. Just picture a river. It has its own name, its own banks, its own journey. But eventually, it flows into the ocean. And at that moment, it stops being a river. It loses its separate identity and just becomes the ocean. That's what he experienced. A total, complete merging with the absolute, with truth itself. Okay, so he found the answer for himself. Mission accomplished, right? Not for Rose. His mission just changed. The next monumental task was, how do I make a map for other people? How can I take this incredible, indescribable experience and turn it into a practical, step-by-step system so others can find it too? So he spent the next 20 years basically living a normal life. He had a job, raised a family, but all the while he was meticulously studying his own mind. He was reverse engineering his own awakening. He wanted to create a blueprint for other sincere seekers, a guide that would help them sidestep all the nonsense, all the dead ends and fake gurus that he had run into. And the culmination of all that intense work was this book, The Albigen Papers. It came out in 1973, And it's part expose of all the phony spiritual and social ideas out there, but more importantly, it's a super practical manual for anyone who's serious about the path of self-discovery. And this unique, almost scientific method he laid out in the book, this blueprint for spiritual search, well, it became known as the Albigean system. So what exactly is this system? Let's dig into the core ideas of his method, which he called the Path of Retreat. And that name, retreat, is actually a massive clue about how the whole thing works. The absolute heart of his entire system is this one concept, the reverse vector. See, most spiritual paths are about adding stuff. You add new beliefs, you add new rituals, you follow a new guru. Rose said, no, do the exact opposite. You don't find truth by piling on more complexity. You find it by working backwards, by retreating away from error. It's like being a sculptor. You don't add clay, you chip away all the stone that isn't the statue. You question everything you think you know, until only the raw, undeniable truth is left. So how do you actually do that? He laid out a really practical 3-step technique. First, you reverse your curiosity. All that energy you spend wanting things and being curious about the world, you turn it back inward and ask, where is this wanting coming from? Second, you build your intuition. And he didn't mean some vague psychic feeling. He meant developing a super sharp inner truth detector by constantly checking your own thoughts for contradictions. And third, this is the big one, you look at the looker. You stop being so obsessed with the things you're observing, and you start observing the observer itself. You try to find out who or what is actually doing all this thinking and seeking. This quote pretty much sums up the mindset you need. It's not about finding some new thing to believe in. It's about having total faith in your own power to see through illusions. The only tool you can really truly trust on this path is your own capacity for radical, honest doubt. Finally, he put this all together in what he called a 3-fold path, and it actually looks a lot like the instructions you'd get from big names like Christ or the Buddha. You've got the way, which is the active search, using that reverse vector we talked about. You have the truth, which is your goal, but it's also your daily practice of being brutally honest with yourself. And then you have the life, which means finding and working with a group of other seekers, because let's be real, this path is way too hard to try and walk it all by yourself. So after all of this, all this questioning, all this doubting, all this stripping away of illusions, where does it take you? Well, it takes you to this. The biggest, most profound question a person can possibly ask, and Rose's work stares this question right in the face. And here it is, the answer he found. His greatest discovery wasn't something new he learned, but something he uncovered. He found that when you successfully peel back every single layer of your programming, your personality, your ego, what's left isn't just an empty void. What you find is that your deepest essence is, and always has been, one and the same with the absolute. The river was the ocean the whole time. And we'll just end it with his own words, from a poem he wrote about his own death. It's mysterious, it's deep, and it perfectly captures the spirit of a man who spent his entire life pointing towards a truth that you can't find in words, but that's waiting there in the silence for anyone brave enough to really look for it.